Good morning, high school politics students. Today we're going to continue our talk on electoral systems by talking about proportional representation. So before I dive into proportional representation, I'd like to refresh your memories on the type of electoral systems. Firstly, we have the majoritarian electoral system, which we covered last class. This is where the candidate who receives the most votes is elected to office. There are two main types of majoritarian electoral systems: first past the post and second ballot. First past the post is what our country, the US, employs, where we host one election where the candidate who wins the most votes wins office, no matter what percentage of votes the candidate receives, whether it be 35%, 40%, or 75%. Second ballot, taken at face value, means two ballots, which is exactly what it is. If in the first round no candidate is able to receive a majority of votes, then there will be a runoff between the top two candidates. The second ballot will only have the two candidates on them, which will guarantee a majority. But today, our focus is on proportional representation, an ideology where parties receive seats based on the percentage of vote that they have received. And the number of seats allotted in a district is called the district magnitude. For example, if the district magnitude is 10, then the number of seats that are up for grabs in the district is also 10. And for a majoritarian electoral system, that number would be 1, as there is only one seat up for grab. There are two types of proportional representation, which is either party list or single transferable vote. I'll talk about that in a few slides' time. And overall, some examples of countries that use proportional representation are many countries in South America or Switzerland and Spain. Mixed electoral system is a combination of both majoritarian and proportional systems, but we'll get to that next class. To better understand the majoritarian and proportional representation electoral systems, I set up a hypothetical scenario. Given that Party A wins 51% of the vote, Party B wins 45% of the vote, Party C wins 2.75% of the vote, and Party D wins 1.25% of the vote. What result would happen in each scenario? What differences do you notice? And based on the differences, what might this say to the disadvantages and advantages of these electoral systems? Because I haven't taught the official methods to calculate proportional representation, just take a calculated guess. Yeah, so let's first take a look at the majoritarian electoral system. Party A wins as 50%, 51% is the majority, meaning that the party wins the most votes. It's quite simple. Proportional representation is a lot more complex, with two methods of calculation, quota and divisors. We'll first take a look at quota. Firstly, we're given in the question that the district magnitude is 20, and this means that the quota, or the vote share that one party would need to guarantee a spot, is 5%. As a result, in quota calculation of proportional representation, we first decide the automatic bids by dividing all the vote shares by 5, which is the quota. And based on each value that we get, we round down to figure out the guaranteed or automatic seats that one would obtain. For example, let's take a look at Party A. Its vote share was 51%, so after we divide it by the quota of 5%, we would get 10.2 automatic seats. But we have to round down, so we would see that Party A gets 10 automatic seats. It makes sense, as with 51% of the vote, Party A should be looking around to get around half of this 20 seats. The other parties use the same calculation, and we end up with Party A having 10 seats, Party B having 9 seats, and Party C and D both having 0 seats. But you may ask, that only accounts for 19 of the total seats, so where does the last seat go to? Therefore, the second part of the process is the remainder seat calculation. As you may have noticed previously, after we rounded down, we left the denominator, or we left the remainder. And with one remainder seat in this occasion, the one with the highest remainder will get the seat. In this case, Party C will get the seat, as their remainder of 0.55 seats is higher than that of the other parties, which are 0.2, 0, and 0.25 respectively. Because Party C has the highest remainder, that means that they were the closest to receiving an automatic seat, and therefore will receive one now. In total, Party A receives 10 seats, Party B receives 9 seats, Party C receives 1 seat, and Party D receives 0 seats. 10 plus 9 plus 1 equals 20. So the other method of calculating proportional representation is the divisor method. In the divisor method, the divisor divides the vote share by a series of divisors to obtain quotients. On the columns, you will see vote share being divided by integers, and after dividing 10 times, we then try to pick out the 20 largest numbers. The numbers in brackets, such as the 1 in brackets after 0.51, represents the largest numbers that will decide how seats are allocated. In this scenario, we see that Party A and Party B have the largest 20 numbers. This means that 10 seats will be allocated to Party A, 10 seats will be allocated to Party B. Quota system can likely provide more opportunistic outcomes for smaller parties compared with that of the divisor system. So class, now what do you think about the differences between majoritarian and proportional representation? And what problems do you see with any one of them? I'll give you a little time to think about that. Yeah, so majoritarian is obviously less inclusive than proportional representation. In our case, Party A will have full control if it was a majoritarian election, but they only received 51% of the vote. This means that many of the decisions made may not accurately reflect the actual thoughts of the overall population, but rather only 51%, which can cause many problems. However, proportional representation is definitely more complex than the majoritarian electoral system. What we just did is a party list proportional representation, more specifically a closed list proportional representation. In closed party list proportional representation, voters vote for parties and candidates are elected based on the party's internal ranking on candidates. For open party list proportional representation, voters vote for parties and candidates at the same time. So depending on how many seats a party secures, they have to elect the candidates with the most votes. Let's take a look at an example of closed list proportional representation from the Croatian elections. On the picture to the right, you can see the party list with each party and the candidates below it. After voting for the party, they will assign seats based on that predetermined list of candidates. This can encourage higher level of party discipline. High party discipline is when party members in a legislature act and vote cohesively and are on the same page about party policy. Because the party decides the list, they will likely choose those that are most likely to adhere to party ideas to win seats, and therefore, in order to be ranked high on the list, candidates have to adhere to party ideas. Examples are Argentina, Spain, and Turkey. On the other hand, for open list, citizens have the final say over which candidates are nominated. If we take a look at this ballot from the Austrian election, we can see that while candidates also vote for party first, they also can vote for the candidate in the party that they want to win the seat. This means that candidates can afford to have lower levels of party discipline because they aren't completely chosen by the party, but rather by the citizens. And one advantage of open list proportional representation over a majoritarian vote is that even if the candidate that one chooses doesn't garner much support, the candidate's vote will not be wasted, as they are still helping elect other candidates in the party to win seats. Examples are Austria, Sweden, and Switzerland. Now we're going to talk about the single transferable vote, a different section in the proportional representation. Unlike party lists, the single transferable vote is geared more to individuals, though it does benefit parties as well. Single transferable vote is a type of ranked choice voting, where each voter will assign rankings to each of the candidates on their ballots. After handing the ballots in, the candidates who earned more votes than the quota, which is determined by a votes cast divided by available seats, will distribute away their surplus votes to the other candidates based on the second choice vote that the voters put on their ballot. There are other ways to calculate quotas, but in today's lecture we'll focus on this calculation the most. So looking at the diagram on the right, let's say there are no write-ins, and there are only 6 candidates running for 4 seats. The quota by vote share percentage would be 100 divided by 4 equals 25%. So if Douglas Campbell receives 50% of the vote, the 25% surplus that he has will be distributed to the other candidates. These surplus ballots will be selected by random. And let's say that after the distributing of the ballots, no candidate reaches the quota of 25% to be guaranteed a spot. With no surpluses left and still seats to occupy, the one with the lowest votes is eliminated, and their ballots will be distributed to the remaining candidates. The process repeats itself until all the seats are filled. So let's take a quick example and assume there are 3 seats up for grabs. After voters hand in their STV ballots, we first calculate the quota and vote share percentage that a candidate has to garner in order to guarantee a spot. With our formula of vote share divided by number of seats available, we can calculate that candidates would need 1/3 or 33.33% of the vote in order to win office. In the first round, we see that only one candidate meets the quota of 33.33%. As a result, the extra 11.67% of the candidate's vote will be distributed to others based on random draws from candidate A's total ballots and seeing what they picked as their second choice. After doing so, we now find that no candidate has reached the quota of 33.33%, and therefore there are no more surplus votes. As a result, we eliminate candidate E because they have the lowest vote share percentage, and redistribute their votes based on what their alternative choice was. After the redistribution, candidate B has just enough votes to hit the 33.33% quota, and only candidates C and D are remaining. Because candidate D has less votes than candidate C, all of candidate D's votes are transferred to candidate C, and candidate A, B, and C end up winning seats. As you can see, there are a few significant differences between party list and single transferable vote. Some of the more obvious ones are the differences in ballot, where voters under the STV ballot have to engage in ranked choice voting, whereas list voting only requires candidates to choose party, and if it's an open list, also choose a candidate. Single transferable vote, while much more complex than party list proportional representation, is definitely more beneficial from the standpoint of voters, as they have much more say over the candidates that win office, due to them being able to rank the candidates. Furthermore, the idea of having less wasted votes is even more emphasized, as no votes will be wasted. We have talked a lot about some of the advantages of proportional representation, but to recap them, proportional representation firstly leads to higher proportionality due to the higher district magnitude. It also contributes to less wasted votes, which in turn encourages higher voter turnout. Parties will have greater incentives to appeal to their core supporters instead of trying to reach out to as many people as possible in order to win a majority of votes. Under proportional representation, parties can focus more on the areas that their voter base cares about, which can lead to more loyal supporters that have their ideas and needs more adequately addressed. Lastly, proportional representation can provide more stability in ethnically and religiously divided societies. For example, if there are severe religious divides between two sides in a country, proportional representation would work a lot better than that of majoritarian rule, as both sides would be represented, and the teamwork could promote cohesion. However, there are also issues with clarity of responsibility, as in multi-member districts, it is unclear who is responsible for tackling certain issues. Furthermore, a weak coalition government may form, which will be less efficient due to indecision and compromises needed to be made in order to pass legislation. Cooperation between parties is much more difficult than within a party, as each party has their own ideologies. Extremist parties can also more easily win seats, as instead of needing the most votes in order to win, all they need is a small proportion of the voter base voting for them to have a say in legislature, which can be disastrous. Lastly, proportional representation is more difficult to voters, especially those that do not frequently check the news on each candidate specifically and might not have a very good picture of some of the pros and cons of voting for each. And that concludes today's lecture. Hopefully you found the class interesting and learned a lot about proportional representation. Here are some sources I used, so feel free to check them out in your free time if you're interested in learning more about this topic.